Our budget review process is now in session again. And Joe Crittenden, would you give the invitation, please?
Yes, I will. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this day that you blessed us with, this opportunity to do good for the people that we serve. Father, help us in this meeting. Help each council member be with our chair. Help us make good, strong, sound decisions for those we serve. Pray for our administration. Pray for the communities that we represent. Help us, Father, to always do what's best for our people. Forgive us where we fail you. And I would ask your continual blessings on our troops. Bring them home safely as soon as possible, Father. These things I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Roll call, please.
Jack Baker.
Here.
Sarah Callan Watts.
Honey.
Bill England.
Here.
Bill John Baker.
Here.
Hartley Buzzard.
Here.
Julia Coates. Here. Brad Cobb. Joe Crittenden.
Here.
Jody Fishinghawk.
Here.
Meredith Cravey.
Here.
Janelle Fulbright.
Here.
Don Garvin. Chuck Hoskin Jr.
Here.
Tana Glory Jordan. Curtis Snell.
Here.
Chris Stokes. David Thornton.
Okay, thank you. Before we begin, Gail has an announcement on the credit cards, right?
Yes, accounting is activating them all for you, so you don't have to worry about activating them. It's good.
Okay.
For trips, right? Huh? For the trips, right? Not Walmart.
Okay. And Doug, are you ready for our legislative review?
Did you get that right? I guess fortunate. All right. You've all been given a thick blue book by the administration that has all the line item budgets for the fiscal year 08, as well as a summarized white book that has several reports in it from the Lawson financial system, as well as narratives from the program staff. You should all also have my report, which is a blue binder, the smaller of the two blue binders. This report is pretty consistent with the format that I've reported to this body in the past. Try not to deviate from it too much from year to year, except only in areas for improvement. And before I get started, I do want to ask all of you counselors to feel free when this process is over. I welcome and invite all your comments, suggestions, and constructive criticism to better enable this process to be more of a useful tool for you as I independently review this budget for this branch. So I'm asking for your input. I think we can always do things better, and especially in areas of our budgeting and appropriation bills where the Cherokee Nation continues to grow year after year in an astounding rate, especially on the tribal discretionary funds. I think the future is going to yield much more importance for this body to understand the revenue streams that we're dealing with, as well as what the prioritization of the funding is going for. Callie's already mentioned an item that we've been discussing in the past regarding what she referred to as a project-based budgeting or capital budgeting. We're going to be looking this year probably at some projects that's going to require some financing, some long-term financing for some long-term assets. We've experienced some of that in the past council this last term with the public issuance of the bonds for the health clinics. and I estimate that and expect we'll be looking at some more opportunities this next fiscal year to leverage our resources. I'm not going to just read my memo. You all have my memo in your book, so I won't just read it. There will be a couple of things I do want to point out that under the first tab there in the memo is that you've noticed that I commented on a couple of significant increases, salaries and wages, as well as contract services.
Yes.
That's a typical note. It's usually...
Councilor Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this is early in the game, but I looked at the book and the $4 million identified as additional revenue that was unaccounted for. I believe, talked to Callie and you earlier. I'd like to make a motion, if it's appropriate at this time, to take the $4 million. There's $1.8 million that's missing for the tobacco compact, but it's a commitment, a particular commitment, and I'm not saying it correctly.
It's surtax.
That's surtax.
The $1.8 million for the tobacco surtax and the remaining $2.2 million, and add it to the contingency reserve with the idea that we have a long battle ahead of us on our citizenship issue and our tribal sovereignty. So I'd like to make a motion for that $4 million that's been identified by Mr. Evans to put $1.8 million in the tobacco surtax and an additional $2.2 million for a total of $4 million in the contingency reserve.
Second motion.
Motion's been made, second. Discussion. Mr. Baker.
Mr. Chairman, we're at the very front end of this, and the administration has come forward with a fairly aggressive budget that has gone in and grabbed a great deal of the carryover dollars that we have. If we take the $4 million that has been identified, then this body might as well pack up and go home, because we're not going to be able to look at cemeteries, we're not going to be able to look at water lines, we're not going to be able to look at housing, we're not going to be able to look at hardly anything. So I highly hope that we hold that reserve of funds until we look at this budget much, much clearer and with a lot more foresight than just jumping in and reserving off some more dollars. But everybody vote your conscience.
Just briefly, and I'm new to this process, but I think it's a real disservice to this body to this early do with the funds what Councilor Watts is proposing. So I wholeheartedly endorse what Councilor Baker has just said, and I hope that we do not pass that motion.
Is there any? Mr. Cobb.
Question on wholeheartedly disagree at this time, or wholeheartedly disagree?
At this time, it's a disservice to this body to do this now when we're just trying to get a handle on this budget that was given to us in a brief presentation yesterday, which we're trying to get a handle on today. So just to be clear.
Mr. Lee.
I thought this was going to be at least a 3-day process where we were going to hear everything, and then at the end, if there was some funding here that maybe we could capture, that we could put it into new projects that we see. I was kind of glad to see $4 million hadn't been accounted for, because I thought, well, with everything that seems to be out of the budget that are concerning my constituents, I wanted an opportunity to at least put them on the table. But if the table doesn't have any money on it left, why are we sitting here 3 days?
Ms. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll happily withdraw this if we are going to agree as a body that we don't do anything until the end with when we know what exactly is, instead of picking off bits and pieces and creating a disjointed picture throughout the 2 or 3 days. If we all agree that we want to do it at the end, I'll withdraw it. Otherwise, I'm looking at the long term, that we need more contingency funds with the different lawsuits we're facing. And we have to do the $1.8 million because that's the tobacco surtax we are obligated to. And it is not in the budget currently.
Is there Any other discussion? Mr. Thorne?
I'm kind of like Bill over here. I think we have things in this budget we need to look at real strong. We've got new initiatives that we need to look at, see if we really need some of those new initiatives. We've got things that aren't in this budget that we brought forward last budget. The rural area fire departments have been left out of this budget. We've got the clothing funding that we talked about, the $200,000 emergency repairs to these houses that people are in dire need of through the year. There's just different things in this budget that we don't have that we should add on at the end of the session. So I'm not for passing this right now until we get to the end of the session.
Especially Bob.
Yes, I was just wanting to say I'm aware of this breathing issues affecting every department of the nation, the whole nation, and why don't we listen to it? And, you know, if it affects every department of the nation, instead of maybe just carving it out of the surplus, why don't we have every department pitch into it? Because it's affecting us all. Just, you know, my idea of it.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan?
We're not actually talking about a 07 budget model or anything like that, so how do you account for this $4 million that's coming over in surplus? Is that in addition to possibly $20 million that's coming into surplus? I mean, we really don't know how the end of the year is going to end up, so this is all estimation anyways. And at this point in time, if you make that motion, and then we as a body start, you know, saying that we want to present this as a budget, no matter where the money is coming from, because right now it's kind of coming out of the sky, right? I mean, we could allocate whatever we want to, and so what's the point?
Mr. Capture, would you like to answer his?
Were you addressing that to me or Kelly?
Kelly.
Both of you.
Oh,
Kelly has.
if I could, I'd just explain. In the budget that the administration proposed, there was $15 million of unappropriated funds. That budget was prepared in the May-June timeframe. Since that time, we've revised estimates on different revenue sources, and that's where Doug has pointed out there's an additional $4 million of surplus that was not brought into the 08 budget because it wasn't on the table at that time. So this is a little different than what we've done in the past, where we've waited until after the audit for any carryover. Because it was unappropriated in the 07 budget, it could not be spent, so we've brought it forward into the 08. And that number was around $15 million back then. It is now closer to $19 million.
And the lion's share of that $19 million is derived from actual carryover from 06. So it's already confirmed.
Right. So I mean, we're getting hung up on this $4 million when it could be $16 million, whatever. I mean, if the body said as a group, and you could get 17 votes that said this is what we want our budget to be, is, you know, $500 million, and you go find out how to get, you know, $100 million more to make it happen, then that's what would happen. I mean, because we're really just talking about this theoretical 400 or $4 million. It could be 19 by now, just in 3 sentences. So, you know, I mean, regardless of what we do at the end, we can change that.
If I could, I agree with what you're saying. As we go through this process, I'm sure there's going to be discussion about initiatives, pros and cons, and we can, Doug and I can sit down and go through a balancing act, and we can take that approach.
So Ms. Watson said she withdraw her motion, providing we hold off until the end. I don't know if that's...
Does that need to be in the form of a motion that we hold off till the end?
Do you want to agree to...
Okay, how about this? If my second will agree, I will withdraw the motion and make the motion that all amendments to the budget occur at the end of our hearings.
I withdraw my second on the first motion and add it to the second motion.
Okay, so the motion's been made and seconded that all amendments to the budget be made at the end of the hearing. Is there any discussion? Yes.
So, as we go through this budget, and we go down through department by department, we just point out high recommendations for people to note later on for one major thing, or, I mean, we've never quite done it exactly like this, but, and I'm not opposed, I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to, I mean, I'd hate in the modifying of this budget to go through and recap health and housing and all of these lines through the budget for one amendment. And I don't know that that's the best way to tackle it, but I guess I'm
Mr. Hoskins, then Ms. Watts.
And it seems to me, Mr. Chairman, that this could result in some redundancies, which I think maybe what Councilor Baker is indicating, in as much as during the process, we certainly want to discuss some of these initiatives, some of these line items in the context in which they're being presented, yet we would withhold any formal action on striking certain lines or adding others until the end, which could create some redundancies and make this process, A, longer than it needs to be, and B, inconsistent with the past practice of the committee, which concerns me as someone who's trying to get a handle on this process and will look to the more veteran counselors for guidance. But so I think it's a wrong approach.
Ms. Watts and Mr. Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that for me, I'm going to take notes, and then I'm going to have my list, and together we prioritize because we only have $1 to spend altogether. And so the way we've done it in the past has allowed for some abuses, I feel like. And so this makes sure that we're looking at the overall budget of the Cherokee Nation for the Cherokee people as one, rather than doing the one-offs and trying to keep track as we go, because we really don't know until later how that might impact other things. So I look at this as an opportunity to be innovative, do it differently than we have in the past, and make sure that we have our priorities straight for the tribe. And it's up to us to individually keep notes of what we do and do not want. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Mr. Henry, you have a comment?
I think just by listening to the comments that it's well understood by the counselors that it would be, you would take your notes and you would set out your thoughts and your ideas during each department, but not take any unnecessary, not take any action at that point. I did want to point out that it will be necessary, no matter which way you do it, to have one final vote on the entire budget for 08. So no matter what happens, you're still going to take a vote at the very end. And at which time there were, I've been in these hearings in the past, although there may have been a vote taken, on day one of the hearings, that vote was amended or revisited on the last day of the hearings. But either way either way you go about it, you will need to take one last vote on the entire 08 budget.
Okay. Is there any further discussion before we... Yes, Ms. Jordan.
Is it my understanding, someone told me we had something like 450 budgets? Is that correct?
Yeah, about 400.
Well, I would sure like to do something on them as we come to them. And then do what Todd said at the end, let's amend if we need to, if we've overspent, so to speak. We'll have to come back and carve some off, but trying to keep up with 450 budgets to do one motion at the end, let's consider doing them as we come to them, getting them over with, and moving on. Is that the way you've done it in the past?
Yes, it is.
Well, Jack, what's your preference?
Yeah, what's your preference? You're accountant.
I'll go to Yoga Kelly right now.
I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. What we've done, what's been my experience, is we keep a running list. But the actual motions to add and subtract generally come towards the end. So that's what I'm saying. We're all kind of saying the same thing. As you go through the individual budgets, if there's something there that you think you don't like this initiative, make yourself a note. If there's something missing, make yourself a note. And there can be discussion throughout the hearings, or as far as changes, we kind of do them at the end, but we start out with, here's what's on the table, here's how much is available. You might make a motion to add something for an initiative. We put that, we usually just put it up on the screen, and Doug and I kind of balance it as we go.
And I've only been through one of these. Is that the way? Because I thought, the way I remember last year's, we actually made motions as we went through, and you put those on the board, and then we
did
amended those at the end.
We did. We just had
we just kind of kept running.
The lion's share of those amendments that was included in that attachment A we referred to. Most of those came on the last day through a collection of note taking, and there were motions made in the first day. But I want to point out something that I would recommend that the body really get a good understanding of what is in this budget first. Because there's a significant amount of new items to the Cherokee Nation's budget this year. I mean, 26 new initiatives over $11 million. That's a significant change in discretionary spending. There's, the administration has taken a bold, aggressive move at identifying some very important initiatives to the chief that Callie's mentioned yesterday. She went through every single one of them that I have on my report and gave you a brief overview of them. But with those, along with our compact funding and some of our other semi-discretionary funds, I would just, advise that my advice would be to, as you're going through it, a lot of your questions will be answered. A lot of your concerns or the unknowns may become known. And this is a really good opportunity as a learning experience for the new counselors to understand where the money's coming from and where's it going. Because when we've got 30-something different funding sources and 18 divisions that are reporting 60-something departments and over 400 individual budgets, it can get overwhelming at times, but that's the whole purpose for the way I've laid this book out, is to understand two different things. Where's all the funds coming from, and where are all the funds being requested to be expended? And I think as we go through this, a lot of like I said, a lot of unknowns will be, a lot of holes will be filled here, and hopefully it will be a good process. But whether you make a motion to change something now, or or wait till the end and do them all, take good notes and then vote on them. Last time I bet we voted individually on 20 items, one right after the other, and got a consensus for the body. You want this in there, yes or no? You want that in there, yes or no? You want to take this out, yes or no? That's the way I recall the process, Mr. Chairman. But that's what I would. It doesn't matter as far as, I don't have a recommendation on whether you make a motion today, tomorrow, or whenever.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter either. We make it.
I'm just here to inform you what's in it.
But information.
Yes.
If through this process we don't do motions to amend as we go along, but we have problems or suggestions with respect, I mean, are we voicing those to the chair, but we're just not in the form of some motion? Is that one alternative? Is that what Councilor Watts contemplates we do? Which, that, as long as I'm clear on it, it might be okay. I just want to handle them going forward, how we are going to voice these concerns.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I might make a recommendation. We can keep a list of consideration items, and as things come up, if the counselor wants to add that particular item to the list for consideration to put in or to take out, either way, just that item get added to the list, then we can accumulate, these items of interest till that time of that you want to consider all of them. That's an option.
Mr. Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think that what may have thrown off is the comment of, well, make a note to yourself or make a note to yourself. It should be more than that. If you see something that comes up in the budget, make a point of it, debate it, flush it out. And as you said, we have a whole staff of people here that can keep track of all your considerations and make that, instead of a formal motion, make it known that this is an item to be considered at the end of the budget process. And between me, Doug, and our Doug support staff on the back row, we'll keep track of it.
But my question is,
Get my bill.
if we go through and debate it, I would think we should go ahead and vote on it then, and then at the end, we could go back and reconsider it.
It's the pleasure of the council.
So, Scott.
I would, not to disagree with the chairman, for me personally, anybody that can put this book together knows more about numbers than I do. And my concern is that if we debate something and vote on it, and I get down to page 5,000 and whatever, and say, whoa, wait a minute now, I just want to be clear what happens. Do we have to revisit something we voted on prior? Because I'm in favor, I am, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the person that put this book together is suggesting that we take notes and at the end just have a discussion about what we're concerned about. And so I'm just, that's kind of how I'm hearing this. So that's my question. Is that I know if we have to vote on every single thing, and something comes up at the end and we miss something, do you go back and revisit what we voted on and make an amendment to it?
I'll hear from a couple more people, and then we'll vote on the question. Ms. Jordan.
I would ask Councilor Watts and Councilor Garland to consider just possibly withdrawing their motion and second. Let's open it up and start the process, and let's see how it evolves. And I think it will naturally take care of itself as it has in years past. Motions will probably be made, seconded, and then we'll fix some things at the end. But don't limit us up front to, we're just going to talk for 3 days, and then at the end, there's going to be one huge agenda item. Folks, I'm against that now. I've already seen some of this log rolling crap. And I'm just going to say that's what it is. I want to talk about these things as we go to them. I want to vote on them. If we don't have enough money at the end, we'll fix it. But I don't want to be stymied at the front to say all we're going to do is talk for 3 days. I've been accused of being too direct. But that's the way I feel about it. So I'd ask you, out of consideration for us new members, give us all an opportunity to work on this as we go along, as I understand it's been done in the past.
Yes, Ms. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With all due respect, I believe that we have an opportunity to change past behaviors. I don't know if this vote will pass, but I'm not going to withdraw my motion. I think that we need to look at it from a bigger priority and a bigger outlook than we have in the past. And I think maybe the way it has been has created opportunities for personal projects that weren't as meaningful to the tribe. And I would rather look and make sure that we have to look at, is health our priority, is human services, and making sure that we've got them all aligned, because otherwise we will be changing votes at the end. And I think we want to try to avoid that. But I don't think that this motion stymies anybody's ability to make changes. We're just going to try to look at it differently so that it's a big picture and we make the right decisions at that time. So I'm comfortable with calling the question at this time.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded that we hold the motions until the end. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
So we should have Gail take a roll call.
She's outside.
Oh, Gary. Show of hands.
You want to do a show of hands?
Oh. Okay. We can show hands. All in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. One, two, three, four, five, six. Okay, all opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're fine. Okay. The motion failed. Yes.
You can make a motion to take 1.8 million of that 4 million and put it in the tobacco surtax, because we have to do that.
Second.
Any discussion? Yes.
Might, the technical side, you might want to consider making a motion to put 4 million on the table first, because 1.8 is not provided for.
Well, that's why I made the motion, I understand why you would do it.
And 4 million funds the 1.8.
Would you restate your motion, please?
Well, I guess I technically have to, it's the 4 million recognized in the book by Doug Evans as unacknowledged revenue has been brought in. Of that 4 million, 1.8 needs to be put in the tobacco surtax, which was left out of the budget accidentally.
If I could clarify, your motion didn't include formally bringing the
Right.
4 million.
Okay.
And
It did
that
not.
was what Doug's point was, it needs both, bring the 4 million and also set aside the 1,849.
Okay, are we clear on that? And are you amending your motion to include the 4?
Yeah, I restated it.
Second.
Okay. Mr. Sullivan?
We're going to discuss?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question. The statement was made that the 1.8 was left out of the budget for the compact. Can you explain that?
Yes, it was an accounting mistake. I take responsibility for that. In our tobacco tax, we have something called tobacco surtax. By legislative act, it is restricted for cancer and diabetes treatment, and that budget didn't get submitted. And the way it works, because tobacco tax is a gen fund revenue source, because it didn't get earmarked, it fell into the available to fund other projects.
Right, so it's not actually a shortcoming, it's just an oversight.
It was an
In this
oversight.
Big thick book,
That's correct.
goes to the crack, which it does happen. I mean, it's one of those things that does happen. So,
Yep.
but we are compact obligated to,
It's not, I'm not sure if it's compact, but it is a legislative act that this body
within
passed.
the nation that we
Yes. That is-
allocate those funds for those expenditures.
Yes.
The revenue, recognizing the surtax revenue is in the budget. It's the transfer of those revenues to the appropriate use budget is what was missing. So when we put that use of funds in there, it's going to take the available revenues that we have right now of 700,000 positive, and it's going to put it into a $1.1 million negative without putting more revenue on the table, which is the 4 million part of the motion.
I'm just curious, if we hadn't had the 4 million on the table to take it from, where would it have been put from?
Well, we had a $700,000 surplus in the chief's budget, and we would have had to go back through and propose reducing something else had we not had the 4 million on the table.
There's a $700,000 surplus?
Yes, in the chief's budget that.
From this year?
Yep.
Mr. Sullivan?
And is this just a estimation, or is it it's just a...
It's based on the revenue estimate.
Okay.
Yes.
Could be higher, could be lower.
Kelly, we have to provide for it somewhere.
Yes, that's the
Okay.
point.
And it was just an oversight, but it's mandatory that we put it in there.
That is correct. There is a legislative act that mandates it's only to be used for that purpose.
And Councilman Watts, your motion was put 4 million on the table so we can take 1.8 million out of it. Or was it 1.8 or 1.1?
1.8.
Okay, we start with $700,000 surplus.
So we still have
The
that
paper.
700,000.
Right, 700 is not enough to cover the 1.8. So before we take the 1.8 out of the 700, we're going to add 4 million, so we've got 4.7 available
And then 1.8
left
out of
over,
that.
and
Okay.
1.8 will come out.
Okay. So are we clear? Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Mr. Evans, would you like to proceed now?
Okay. Well, that hits I think we just hit the high points of my memo, so I won't finish going over that. I did want to point out one thing that I did mention in there, and that's the indirect cost pool budgets are coming in under the amounts that the programs are budgeting to provide in IDC funding at our current rate. This will serve as an indicator that future rates may experience a slight decrease as we have in the past. Now, this topic of indirect cost I'm going to get into much more detail here a little bit later, but it is something that this is a significant item anytime that our overhead or our resource groups that are directly supporting or indirectly supporting the programs are budgeting to spend less than what the programs are going to fund. That allows us to, what that means is, in layman's terms, is that with the amount of volume of program activity that goes up at the Cherokee Nation, we're able to sustain that growth without directly increasing our support staff. In other words, the support staff, the resource groups that's funded out of the indirect cost pool, are able to do more with less, in so many words. Effectively managing overhead, the way I see it, and managing growth with non-proportionate increase. That's a good thing. We've got a lot of activities that we'll go over in just a little bit that the indirect cost pool is funding. Everything from accounting, human resources, purchasing, half of our budget. There's an enormous amount of activities in that indirect cost pool, and there's a service being provided out of there to all the direct services in support. It's a support service. That's what it is. And any time that we can keep our support costs relatively flat while growing our direct funding, service programs, that's a good thing. I wanted to point that out in this memo. There are some, and you can follow in the book, or you can follow on the slideshow there. I try to point out some points of interest that are kind of significant. One of them, the first one, is obviously the Tribal Discretionary Fund, or the GEN Fund, has the 26 new requests. These initiatives range from recurring service programs to reserves for IDC negotiations. Now, all of these individually, Callie went over yesterday and gave you a brief synopsis of each one's purpose. And they're utilizing $11.5 million of discretionary funds, and there'll be another slide that I'll show in just a little bit. Some of these initiatives are appearing to me as though they are recurring in nature. And not that I see a problem with them at this point, because of the level of carryover we've been able to sustain from year to year. That's what's minimizing my concern. Now, anytime, obviously, we use non-recurring funds like carryover and fund repeating activities that have to do with salaries, full-time employees, things like that, then there's obviously a concern for how we're going to fund these positions in the future. Historically, we carry over a significant amount of tribal discretionary dollars. We typically appropriate the vast majority of them, but this time we're going to spend a lot of that carryover, and that's a good thing. We're not here to profit, but to spend money. The second item is the dividend estimate from C&E up to this point. It's a $36 million estimate based on 30% of projected net income from C&E, and it has consistently experienced a significant growth trend. Matter of fact, it's doubled since 2005. I've got a chart in here to show you the graphical depiction. You may have already seen it in your book, but this is one area that is the source of the tribal discretionary growth. I just want to make sure that everyone understands. This funding source is what has enabled more discretionary job growth than anything, by far. I mean, I would say that probably 55 to 60% of our discretionary revenue is dividend.
Close. When you add up all the tax revenue, it's neck and neck. Taxes and dividend
I would like to,
Mr. Sullivan?
yes.
Now, is there anything in here that's one thing to compare budgets to budgets, but is there any actuals in this document here? for
Yes.
this? Okay.
Oh, for dividends?
Comparison?
For the dividend?
Right.
Yeah, but I've got a page in here,
Okay,
Chris.
if it's in there, I was...
Yeah, we'll be able to see some actual comparisons from like the last year we audited 06. Anyway, I did want to point out to the body that since 2005, the dividend increase from the gaming activities is phenomenal. We have literally doubled. We're up to 36 million off of 18 and 05. And that is, the reason I bring it up is because they're in the past. We've had long discussions, and the body has had significant amount of debate and even some action items and things that statutorily raise the dividend. And some of your debate and appropriations are going to be considering allowing them what the resources they're going to need to grow their activities. And as long as everyone understands that a lot of these programs we're going to be looking at that's coming out of the tribal discretionary funding source is directly related to CNE's operations. Okay. The third significant point I wanted to point out is we have several programs that are consistently budgeting minor increases. Now, they're also spending less than their budget every year. What that drives is a trend or a pattern that's a major contributing factor to the discretionary funds having carryover growth from year to year. If the same percentage of discretionary activities were underspending their budget year after year, then the carryover would be the same percentage as the budget growth. But that's not the case. Our carryover is growing at a faster rate than our discretionary revenues are growing. And the reason being is because we're growing in our underspending of our discretionary funds. And that's a general statement, it's a generic statement, and to go and actually specify or to clarify that with specificity into individual departments, we're going to have to go into, and I've commented on several in the book, areas where that happens. But the reason I put this point of interest on here is because it's important for us to understand why we're consistently having an increased level of carryover year after year after year.
Mr. Collins, you had...
Will those be pointed out each and every time you come to them? If you can possibly remember.
Yeah, I've got several of them noted right here. Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
Ms. Gator, did you have to?
I was just going to comment on that. One of the things I've seen from the administration side is we have had explosive growth of revenue, and when you have explosive growth of revenue, you have to get the systems in place to put the funds to the proper services. So I think part of the issue with carryover growing is that we just didn't have the systems in place for the delivery and the capability to execute on those budgets. The second point is what I brought up before, project budgets. We do a budget mod in March, give a program $2 million, say, go out and build some water lines. That's a long-term project. It's probably not going to get spent by the end of the year. So, to me, this is just another reason to separate our project budgets from our operating budgets.
It's a good explanation, Kevin. The last point of interest is we look at a budget and it says it's $400 million. And it has $39 million of road funding in it. at least 25 of that will stretch beyond this next year. And you're going to see the effect of the way that we budget our roads being in the comparison charts between our actuals and our budgets. That's one of the things that is the largest standouts, and I bring it up every year just as a point of interest because it is a material amount. The interfund transfers, that also adds to our total budget authority. It's $25 million as well in the 400. The interfund transfers are something that we might want to look at in the future of excluding from the appropriation bill amount, because it's a use of funds, but it's an internal use of funds to get it from the front pocket to the back pocket. Okay, to transfer that fund requires a booking of a use of fund, like an expenditure on a governmental financial statement. It's like an expense, and it needs to be provided for. Then we turn around and we spend the same $25 million that we just moved from the front to the back. Okay, that added to our $400 million. Then we go and spend it the way it's designed for, however that is, and that also adds to the budget authority. So the same $25 million actually contributes 50 of the total budget. Okay, so I wanted you to understand that these transfers are a double use of funds. And you'll hear me say that from time to time in the finance committees and budget mods where, it's a double use, it's a transfer. Maybe one day we can get our heads together and figure out how to exclude the transfers from our appropriations bill. So really we have a $350 million expense budget. Some of that is a reserve, but there are a couple of items, that $350 million, you've already addressed the tobacco surtax. One other item that we'll go through in here is there's a $6 million food cost that will need to be added to the budget as well. And it was, it's the actual cost of the food for the food distribution program. In the past, this isn't to you that are returning counselors. You may recall last year we put it back in as well. The program budget's their operational budget, and they focus in on that. And the food cost is a pass-through, similar to a pass-through item. And it's a client service, but we got to we bring in the food cost in and show the cost of the food because we have to for GAAP. And their operational budget doesn't necessarily have any availability of those dollars because it's in food. So anyway, that will need to be brought in at the end of this as well. The next slide, which would be the discretionary funds. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, okay? Because Kelly has already gone over these, and we'll look at them a little bit more later. It's $11.6 million. And several of these projects appear to me, again, that they're recurring in nature. We can move off of that. It's already gone through. Now, let's look at the, if I might, Mr. Chairman, if you would indulge me, I'd like to pause here for just a minute and let me take a brief roadmap through this book, okay? And then I'll come back to these charts here. I want, for the first, we probably won't need to do this next year and the years after that, but this first go around, I want to go through the book and get you understanding where my thought process and how I put this together. There's two ways that I look at the appropriations bill for the Cherokee Nation. One is, where's the money coming from? The funding sources. The other, where's it being spent, allocated out? There are some of our funding sources, and if you would, please turn to the tab that says, I'm sorry, it's not a tab, it's page 6 in your first section there. The funding sources at the top of this page that are bold with the little asterisk out beside them, those are what are referred to as discretionary or semi-discretionary. The tribal funded or gen fund, motor fuels, indirect costs, motor vehicle. Those are the things where the body here can enact that impact this funding source. Now, obviously, like for IHS Health, it's discretionary somewhat in nature, but it's compacted for the purpose of health. So it just doesn't come with a specific budget attached to the funding. It kind of comes with a general. And the DOI compact's the same way. You'll see them in self-governance. They'll be called DOI self-governance, that funding source 22. You'll notice it's 11.8 million. The IHS self-governance, 86 million. I mean, it's a pretty substantial funding source. Those above the line are where I focus on. The ones below the line are budgets that I've heard people call them in the past, this council ratifies the congressional appropriation. But the ones at the top are the ones I want to focus on. The next 3 tabs in my book focus on those funding sources. And we're looking at it from a source again. It's this block of funds are available for Cherokee Nation appropriation for desired purposes. Let's turn to the first one. Tribal funded. That's the gen fund. And it's organized by group or division. It'd be under the tab discretionary dollars by level 1 by division. Now the next 2 tabs in this book drill down from here. Okay? Because although behind this tab there may be a gen fund, and then it summarizes the motor fuels on page 10 and indirect cost on page 11, it's by funding source again. But I'm going to peel it back in the tab behind that one, which is the level 2 tab of gen fund. Let's look at we know the divisions, that was on the level 1. Now let's look at all the departments that are underneath each division that's using these funds. Level 3 is the same way, except it goes to the next level. Okay? So those tabs up to that point are looking at it from the funding source perspective. Beyond that, the rest of the book looks at it as an organizational perspective. Or department or area of responsibility, and where is that department getting all of its funding? Okay, it's a little different there, but as you are enabled to kind of as you become more aware of how to drill through this book, it makes it real easy how to go and find exactly what you're looking for. Do you want to look for new initiatives funded by the gen fund, or do you want to look for this particular division's what they're funding from IHS doing? You know, then if you understand how this book is put together, then you can go straight to what you're looking for. Going back to the overview, our revenues, as you can see, took a spike in 2007. That's predominantly related to our bond proceeds from our bond issuance for the health clinics. You'll notice we went from 347 million to 382. That's a $35 million increase from 06 to 07. Bonds was 30 million of that. It's a $38 million decrease back to this year's budget level. Now, granted, when we put the 4 million more on there, that takes us down to 34. There's some other things that will be coming into play. But we won't get, in this comprehensive budget, we won't get back up to the level of the 07 because of the bonds. And again, that's an area where as we look at areas of isolating our capital budgets from our operating budgets, then these type of comparisons won't be misleading. our expense budgets. Here's the expense budgets represented since 2003. The green bars represent the audited actuals. Now, granted, it looks like there's a lot of unspent funding. In some cases there are, but we also have to understand that all reserves are not identified in here. We have roads, which is a significant amount of those unused portions at the top. That's another area where it's distorting this chart. You know, anywhere from $20 to $25 million a year is going to be identified in that top block there of unused budget funds because of the way we budget all of our entitled road funding, or all of our road funding that we're receiving. 2007, you know, again, it spiked up, went up about 60 million. More than half of that's the bonds. It dropped back down in 08. We've got a $20 million decrease in 08 compared to 07. That's, for the most part, that's a combination of a couple of big expense types. One of them is the capital construction reduction in 08 from the clinics. And that's offset by about a $10 million increase in salaries. But, you know, I say that, but that's the line item. Now, that I don't say that to alarm you, a $10 million increase in salaries. You know, you have to understand where we're going from and to, because it's not that big of a percentage increase. Here's our dividend growth I referred to earlier. 24% increase from 05 to 06, and it grew 30% from 06 to 07, and then another 20% this time. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, both in 06 and 07, we actually increased throughout the year our original budget estimate because of performance by C&E exceeding in some cases even their expectations. So,
how was that related to the budget?
A percentage of their net income is paid out in the form of dividends.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If there's an actual, but as far as budgeting goes, we're just looking at
that. Okay, for instance, the 2007 budget started, I believe, at 26 million. But it ended 07 with 30.
Okay, so these are actuals, they're not the budgets. That's what I was wondering, if these are budget targets or if these are actuals.
Those are budgets, but they're adjusted throughout the year to get, if we know we're going to exceed or miss our budget, then we'll adjust those budgets throughout the year.
But these are the actuals.
Those are close to those are the actual, aren't they?
They are close for 05 and 06. I know his little chart says budget, but those are very close to where we ended the year.
Okay. All right, that's what I was wondering before, because sometimes if you just compare, you know, a budget number, then
exactly.
Yeah. Generally, we will budget the dividend income during this process, and then throughout the year, I monitor their financials, and if they're performing better, we'll increase it.
This is one of those funding sources that, again, because it funds so many discretionary activities, if we know that their performance should yield us $3, $4, $5 million more than what we've got in the budget, we need to get those funds on the table and get them available for appropriation. And Callie she monitors that throughout the year. Any other questions on this slide? The IDC pool. This has always been a challenge for me to explain this chart, and I tweaked it a little bit from the way it used to be presented. The blue part, or let me rephrase, the green bars represent all of the budgets that are funded out of the indirect cost pool, the total of their budget. So as you can see, in 2008, IDC pool's activities are requesting almost $22 million of spending authority. Now, in 08, this budget also contains, at 17%, 16.97, at that percent, they're going to fund $2.9 million more than what the IDC pool budgets are even requesting. Okay? Now, the one thing about the indirect cost is that's a moving target. And that target is adjusted every other year. So it takes 2 years to effect a rate change from your year you just finished, its actual performance. So although we may budget a surplus, obviously, this is another good example, Chris, where actuals will affect this budget and the future is going to be reflective of the past actuals, not budget. The budget is a tool for negotiation of the rates, but they consider the over or under recoveries from 2 years ago. The reds down at the bottom, as you can see, those are shortfalls, budget shortfalls, and they are not necessarily I would say a budgeting problem. Okay, they're a result, because we may have a huge surplus, or what an actual experience would be an over recovery in 03 that's driving an 05 shortfall, because we overcharged the programs in 03. We in fact did incur an over recovery or surplus. So the IG required us to lower our negotiated indirect cost rate 2 years later, or 05, which means we were under recovering through that year. It's a constantly balancing act that's 2 years out all the time, and it's managed through the rate. That clears my... I don't know what else. I mean, I would gladly answer any questions that I can, and to help explain this if anyone's unclear. But
Ms. Gager.
Now that Doug has put you to sleep, I'll wake you up. Doug puts this up here each year, and really the purpose is the IDC pool is a balancing act, and our goal when we're doing budgets and we're doing the proposals is to try to even that out. As you can see, we've had a bit of a downward trend, and we're trying to stabilize it, because when the programs are trying to do their budget with limited resources, if they do a budget at 17% and we do our negotiation and it ends up at 20%, they've got to cut something else. So there's been a real effort to try to stabilize that rate so that you don't have as much inconsistency as we did in the past.
Thank you.
one other thing I might add to that is indirect cost budgets require council approval, just like general fund. And although that they're budgeted on a break-even basis, which means they're going to up their revenue estimate, except it's going to be called not revenue, it's going to be called recovery, indirect cost recovery. They're going to up that right along with upping budgets. So even though it appears that they may request a budget increase for an indirect cost item, and it looks like it's funding itself, well, it will at the expense of the rate. So we always need to understand, and that's why you won't see very many indirect cost budgets, because they manage that pool. And I'll say that Callie and her department and administration have done a good job, in my opinion, managing this pool, because I relate it back to overhead. And how well can you support the direct side of the organization, in our case, the direct services. And as long as that rate, you can see, ever since 2003, we've been experiencing a consistent rate decrease. Those are good numbers. That's a good trend. Any other questions on? Before I move on. Okay. The next slide is our motor fuel tax compact, and I break it out by the groups that's requesting. You see. The legal, that's the Marshal Service. The Education Department is primarily the scholarships and the higher education reserve for the trust, the 25% reserve for the trust. You'll see that the education dropped about $500,000, and that's due to a funding increase, one-time subsidy that's not being repeated in 08. The Health Division is representative of funding for motor fuels for the Veneta Clinic. That's what the health numbers are. Community Services, that's the road program. That's the district motor fuel district road program, and that typically will include carryover. The Human Services, we have historically funded the cash match requirement for the food program out of motor fuels, and we've kept it in there year after year. Career Services has a $280,000 repeating request, and that's vocational education. The housing rehab, as you'll notice, has taken a significant decrease, 1.7 down to 100,000. That's the minor emergency repair. It was the minor emergency repair program that was funded in 07 experienced a significant funding increase at mid-year. I think it, if I'm not mistaken, I think it almost doubled at mid-year, going from like $1 million to $1,750,000 or something. And but that's not in this budget, only to the tune of $100,000. Yes, ma'am.
You said at mid-year it was added to?
I believe that minor emergency repair, I can pull up my budget history reports, but I believe that program experienced a significant appropriation sometime around the March time frame of 07 this year. Do you recall?
I believe you are correct. And motor fuels tax, we generally do budget mods sometime early in the year for any carryover. I'd have to go back to the detail and look, but housing rehab may have been one that was supplemented with gen fund dollars. I mean, it's all discretionary, but we account for it separately. Motor fuel tax is one of those funding sources that is actually fairly flat. A couple of years ago, we had a little bit of a kick in that funding source. We settled $1 million, not lawsuit, but disagreement with the state. So we got a one-time inflow of additional motor fuels tax, and that may have been the source for the housing rehab. I just have to go back and look. Do you remember that one, Doug?
That was 06.
Was that 06?
That million.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
But this housing rehab, whether it comes from motor fuel tax or gen fund, the $100,000 that's in the budget will carry it about a month, maybe. That's the $5,000 for low-income elders, for roof repairs, minor emergencies, up to $5,000.
$5,000 emergency.
Yeah, it's up to $5,000.
Is that the one this morning, I hate to interrupt, that we reported on? That he had handed out this morning, said we done 400 or something of them?
$499 or something, yes.
He said, okay, this morning, this was emergency repair, that we done 409 this year? At $5,000?
Yes. What we would like to be able to present to council is a HOSTA report on the housing rehab. I believe that a lot of the need is now being met with NAHASDA dollars. We can gather that information and bring it to the meeting.
The biggest problem that we've always found with NAHASDA dollars for these minor emergencies is to use the federal dollars, you have to do a environmental. Well, the environmental costs more than the repair a lot of the time, and if it causes these elders to have to wait 6 weeks to get the environmental for us to go out and take care of an emergency problem.
If council would like to review those statistics, we can bring them forward, and I can also ask somebody to address that concern.
Did we use all the 1.75 million that was in the budget before? Have we used it all for that?
I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to
Emergency
answer
repair?
that. I'd have to run a report.
We can get that for you. I don't have it off the top of my head.
David, did you have a question?
Yeah, I don't get this confused with housing rehab. Housing rehab is a completely different contract than housing fund. It doesn't have anything to do with emergency housing.
This is minor emergency repair.
This has always been funded through discretionary funds. And has that program ran out of funding, the council would refund it. And it hadn't been just give 1.7 million last year. It was refunded during the year.
But it was, I'm sorry, but it was a needed amount of money to cover those emergency repairs. That's what I'm trying to ask. I have to yield to these more senior council people to tell me that.
Well, part of this is what, the ice storm and other emergency or not?
Not really. No, that was a separate funding.
Yes.
Chairman, I'd just like to address the question. I believe we have spent, if not most of it, all of it, or at least obligated it this fiscal year. What I'd like to point out in relation to that is that we have probably, I don't know, we budget about $4.5 million a year. We have several years that are not completely spent of the HOSTA rehab funds. The rehab funds can be used for emergencies, and I'd like for us to talk a bit about that, because that is why we've essentially supplanted rehab with tribal funds, and so we're using 1.7 million in 07 of tribal funds for emergencies when we could have been using, in many instances, rehab money that's going unspent. That's federal dollars. So I'd like for the committee to entertain a discussion about that and have Marvin Jones here to talk with you about it. Thank you.
Janelle.
Well, my question is a little bit different here. I'm wanting to know, the motor fuels tax money, you had told me once before, was based on 2 gasoline stations. This one and the one at Fort Gibson. I want to know, is the new station at Roland, if we buy our gas there, will that increase the motor fuels tax, since it's based on our consumption? He said it was a complicated formula, the compact.
Yes, Kelly.
It is based more on population than it is our gasoline sales.
Okay.
There was a baseline that was set when the compact was entered into, because that was one of the considerations we looked at when we were, I was at CNB at the time, and we looked at the Roland Travel Plaza. And based on the formula that was set, that doesn't really help us. We do a population audit each year and submit that to the state, and they calculate it based on our population.
Okay, that's what I was wanting to know, how the compact works.
Yeah.
Right.
What the real negotiations were was we had bought a couple of stations, and we were going to sell tax-free, and the Loves and everybody got hot, and we negotiated with the governor, and we said, it's okay. We've got 7% of the population, and we negotiated down to 5% of the fuel tax would come back to us. And so whether we sell a gallon of gas or not, for 20 years, we get a percentage of the state's fuel tax collection.
That's what I want to know.
And so we don't even have to sell gas to get it.
Just back to this rehab, this housing rehab. I hate to say that they could probably take funding out of that Cherokee Nation Housing Rehab and put it in emergency funds, because I think you need to look at it and see how many people are waiting for housing rehab on that list, because I think if you was to fulfill all of those people that's on that list, you wouldn't have any money in housing rehab. But I think you need to really take a good close look at that, because when you go pull money out of that fund and put it in another fund, I don't even know if you can do it. But the thing is, you're going to take money away from people that's sitting there waiting to have their house rehab instead of an emergency.
But we'll get to that later in the budget, right? To that item.
Yes, sir.
When we get to specifics.
I've got some slides that'll get into the housing plans across the years and the utilization of those IHPs between the Housing Authority and the Cherokee Nation.
Okay.
Any comments on the motor fuels? Okay, let's look at some of the numbers based on our employment, which would be identified in salaries. Click here, okay. As you can see, we've experienced a pretty good growth pattern here in employment and the related salary costs to it, and we're able to maintain some mid to upper 80 percentile of actual expenditure of the budget. In 2007, we had a pretty good increase over 06, and then there's the additional $10 million increase in 08. I'll say that, point out that of this, 82% of this salary growth in 08 is in service divisions and largely related to the Muskogee Clinic coming online. Okay, so that thing is driving some exceptional growth here. And when I go into the other charts, I'll give you a little bit more. The rest of the 18% is pretty well split 50-50 between the resource groups, support groups, and the governments and commission group. As that salary relates to actual head counts, you can see the significant growth. Again, over 200 positions in 08 compared to the 07 budget. And 120 of those are related to Muskogee in the health department. They're related to the health department, of which the vast majority of those are the Muskogee Clinic.
That's something I understand. Can I?
Yes.
Of course, I probably don't understand this, the growth that's going to the Muskogee Clinic, is that not federal dollars in that growth? Aren't we going to receive funding from the federal government to cover that money? That's not discretionary funds.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, majority of this funding increase is coming out of the compact for the clinic, joint venture. Okay, the next slide is the same salaries that we just talked about in the previous two ago. Here's the 90 million broke out by group. The governments and boards, basically it's the Office of the Chief and the Tribal Council, the Supreme Court and District Court, and then all the commissions and boards make up the blue part. The service divisions are just that, all the direct service, and then the resource below. And 14% of the service divisions are growing at a 14% rate, or $8.2 million. The government and the boards and commissions are growing at 11%, and the resource divisions are growing at a 9% rate. So our largest growth, again, is in the service divisions. One other slide here is tie that back to positions, and here's where you'll see the numbers for the 2,635 budgeted positions. And you can see that obviously the center part of the chart, the maroon, is where most of that growth is. 60% of the growth from the year. Any questions on this slide? I believe okay, now that completes the total charts that encompass all of the Cherokee Nation. The book, all that was obviously the first tab. Right after that last slide is where you'll see that page 6 that I again under the tab 1, the very first tab. Page 6 shows you the discretionary funds. Page 7 is basically an income statement. It's a revenue and expenditure statement that has the 08 budget compared to the 07 budget. It compares to the 06 actuals. And it also has an 06 budget compared to the 06 actuals. Now the reason that comes to play here is 06 is our last closed audited year. If you look at, for instance, 06, Chris, on the budgeted dividend on page 7, the top part there, the 06 compared to 06, in that top group there for revenues is the dividend from component unit. We slightly exceeded our budget. That was recognized in the form of carryover in 07, and that was a component to a significant carryover bill that Callie brought forward after the audit was issued. There was several $1 million of carryover that was put on the table for appropriation, and that explains $2.5 million of it right there. Bottom half of that page is all the funding sources. And you can see how each funding source, whether it's tribal or federal, how it's moving from year to year. I mean, there's a lot of information on one page right there, so I just want to include it in there. Page 8 is the staffing, the salaries and the full-time employee equivalents. This page, it's a landscape page, and the right half of it, the full-time employees, those numbers came from the blue book, the thick blue book, going through and counting them up. But this is how those groups that are on those charts between government, service, and resource groups, these are the components of each one. As you'll notice, comparing the salaries and wages from 07 to 08, the largest percentage is the service group, with community services having the highest percentage, but not the highest number. Health service obviously that's $5 million of the salary increase, and like I said, it's largely due to the clinic coming online. Okay, now as far as the summary goes, the next tab, we're going to start peeling the budget down by source. So each page now is going to either be specific to a funding source, or it's going to be specific to a group.
Would you like to take a, we've waited an hour and a half, we'll take a 15-minute break.
Sure. Thank you.
That's a long time.